Hi everyone. We're just getting everyone out of the waiting lobby there and into the event here. We'll kick it off here in 2 seconds. Like we've got everyone in. Look, I'd like to welcome everyone for this very first event here. It's a fairly unique PMI event, I'd like to say, between the Ireland chapter of PMI and the Newfoundland chapter, Newfoundland and Labrador chapter there. So it's a bit of a cross the pond, I guess, is the best way to put it. And I look forward to the future joint partnership on these discussions as we push forward here. I think we've got a very exciting presentation by three very experienced individuals across the sector of offshore energy, and it's going to be a very interesting discussion at the back end of this. Just a quick admin, if you do have questions, please put them into the chat. I will monitor those and try and add them into the panel discussion on the back end. However, for the first sort of 30 minutes of this discussion, we will be hearing from our experts as they go through their presentation. So if we go to the next slide there, Mariana. So quick intro, Bill recently retired. He has over 35 years of experience in the offshore and marine industry, specializing in the Arctic regions. He has worked for large organizations such as Sandwell Engineering, ExxonMobil, and BP on projects from Alaska to Russian Far East. More recently, he has served as engineering manager for Husky Energy's West White Rose project and later consulted on LNG export and floating wind turbine evaluations. Dowie Jones, 20 plus years, progressive experience working in a variety of engineering management, project management, and project engineering roles on brownfield and greenfield projects, primarily offshore and onshore oil and gas across all phases of project lifecycle, which I think is a huge asset to this discussion. Projects with values up to 10 billion across 4 continents. Currently working as an engineering manager with ACA Solutions. The third panelist we have is Andrew, who is a project director for Mainland Sea Offshore Wind and INTOG floating wind project. With a background in mechanical engineering, he began his career in maintenance management before gaining extensive experience in drilling engineering and well construction for large-scale international energy projects. He later transitioned to renewables, working in marine advisory and project management for early-stage offshore wind projects in Ireland before joining ESB in 2023. His expertise in energy and sustainability is supported by a master's in well engineering and design and an MBA in energy and sustainability. So I'd like to welcome everyone and our panelist discussion, and I will hand it over to Bill to go through his presentation first.
Yep, thank you for that, Daniel. And just one slight clarification. I was engineering manager for Husky up until the project shut down in 2020 due to COVID, of course. Just for clarity, I'm not involved with the project during its final completion phase after its restart up. I ended up in Canada to do a postgraduate degree in Calgary, and I then joined an engineering company in Vancouver, initially to pursue a career in marine engineering, but it did divert quite a bit into offshore engineering as well as marine projects, and particularly with a focus on the region that we see here in the Arctic and subarctic regions. And so most of my major project experience has been in this environment, from the Canadian Beaufort Sea, Alaska, through to the Russian Far East and even parts of the Russian Arctic. Just for those who are on board who are not from Newfoundland and Labrador, I would like to point out Newfoundland, does not have a latitude problem. St. John's is actually at the same latitude as Paris, and well to the south of Ireland and the UK. But I did want to draw perhaps during this discussion, some similarities between the geographical location of Newfoundland on the eastern seaboard of North American continent and Ireland on the western seaboard of both Europe and the UK. So just geographically, there perhaps are some analogies there. Just to start off, I wanted to touch on the Hibernia project. It's a good case study in offshore project management and execution, and it's very, very familiar to all those who are from Newfoundland and Labrador. And I'm just going to try and just touch on it at a very high level and at a very fast pace. But the project is what's called a gravity-based structure. So the substructure is in concrete and it sits on the seafloor in about 80 meters of water. It was basically the launch project for the subsequent offshore developments on the Grand Banks in Newfoundland and Labrador. Having said that, it went through a fair amount of turmoil and churn to get it even to the starting gate, and a lot of time can be spent on a lot of the key issues that had to be, and the hurdles that had to be jumped over at the time. And this extended from, the price of oil going into the basement. Government intervention was required to sort of support the project. One of the key equity partners, Gulf Canada, pulled out at a critical moment. And when the project did eventually start and get into the execution phase in 1992, it quickly sort of fell into some level of disarray, I would say, in failing to meet project schedule and cost targets. And there was significant changes in the project execution. I would say there were both the management team was changed out, and there were significant changes with the contractor. But at the end of the day, Hibernia was indeed a success story. There was a requirement for a lot of in-province content, and at the early stages of the project, Mobil went through a major provincial sort of industrial benefits program. It looked developing, assisting local companies to pre-qualify and to understand the procurement systems for the offshore industry. So at the end of the day, I would say the project got to the finishing line, and it remains a success to this day, not only for the ownership and the partners, but also for the province of Newfoundland and for the governments in terms of both equity profit stream and the royalties and the industry that was developed in Newfoundland. I think the key parts of the success were probably measured by the union agreement. It was a union site for construction in Newfoundland, so that basically gave a speedy resolution to disputes. It basically effectively meant there was a no strike clause, I would say, in the agreements. And with the restructuring of the construction management team, one of the key elements, in my mind at least, was the improved communications between the engineering and construction, and that, along with a significant or major change in the execution method for the concrete construction part of the overall project, allowed the project to get to the finishing line and to be installed successfully in 1997. The picture on the top there is just a location for construction for Bull Arm, it's called, and that's the major location for construction of the base. There's a lot of marine wharves there for receiving bulk materials and inbound supplies, and there's also a major fabrication facility there that was used for one of the 5 major sub-assemblies, or super modules as they were called, for the topsides. So perhaps you could move to the next slide. This is a smaller project that I was involved with right after the end of the Hibernia project at the end of the 1990s. This is called the Transshipment Terminal, and it comprises an onshore tank farm and 2 berths for crude oil tankers, and it acts as the transshipment terminal, taking dedicated shuttle tankers for offloading from any of the projects on the Grand Banks to this terminal, and then it's reloaded into export tankers to market, typically to the eastern seaboard. Just one of the reasons I put this on this slide up was really I give some credit at the time to the project was managed by Mobil Oil along with Chevron, and the Mobil manager, I think, was influenced by some of the work that was going on in the UK in the offshore sector and other industry segments in the UK following the Crine report, and it was looking at different ways of basically doing business when it came to major capital projects. And I thought it was quite a brave undertaking, actually, to look at what was to try and sort of replicate these objectives for a medium-sized project in Newfoundland. So at the end of the day, I would say the project was probably not an outstanding success in terms of the objectives of executing as an alliance contract, but it was not an abject failure either. It was something somewhere in the middle. But what it did through is it had a fully integrated management team between the engineering contractors and the construction management team and the owners team as well. And it had a different contractual relationship in terms of some of the manors were more closer to cost with fixed overheads and profit margins. So I think it was, as I said, a brave attempt, and I think it's probably worthy of sort of some review and some discussion at some point. The next project, I think, on the next slide is more. Oh, back one, please. The next one is a current project. It's called the West White Rose project, and it's a wellhead platform to support the Sea Rose floating production system again on the Grand Banks in Newfoundland. This is another concrete gravity-based structure. It's called a slightly different term. It's called a CGS, concrete gravity structure. And it's built actually in a slightly different location down in Placentia Bay called near the port of Argentia. It's slightly different in terms of construction technique. It's the complete structure is built in a dry dock as opposed to Hibernia and Hebron, and it means that it does have the impact of being able to float the entire completed structure out from the graving dock as in a completed state. But it does mean the topsides are installed offshore. So when it comes to SIMOPS, I think Joey will say more about that in the next presentation. But there's quite a critical element for this structure later this year when the CGS is towed out and installed, and the topsides are installed with the vessel you see in the bottom slide here, which will require very careful operations in terms of mating these structures together with a very narrow weather window to allow that operation to take place. Moving on to the next one. The next slide is there were some major projects in the Russian Far East, most called Sakhalin 1 and Sakhalin 2. Sakhalin 1 was a project led at the time by ExxonMobil, and Sakhalin 2 was a project led at the time by Shell. And both of these represented major investments into the Russian oil and gas environment in the environment that existed in Russia, in the Russian Federation after the collapse of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s. And the Russian government was very interested in attracting inward investment. I know the geopolitical situation now is very radically different, but this is an opportunity for some major investment in the Russian Far East. And there was both a lot of these structures were also built in the Russian Far East. There are concrete gravity structures again, with the exception of the one on the top there, which actually was redeployed from the Canadian Beaufort Sea, which was one of the first projects I worked on in the early 1980s. Just to give an example for this one, the bottom one is actually called the tanker loading unit and was installed at the bottom end of Sakhalin Island. And it's for offloading actually LNG, not crude oil. And so I was responsible for the engineering on the bottom part of the structure. The top part was the engineering was and fabrication was by SBM, who are based in Monaco and Rotterdam. And just to give some indication of the diversity, Nippon Steel was the major contractor, and all of the structure was fabricated in Indonesia. And the Shell was the owner based in Holland and the Netherlands. So it just gives some idea of the diversity of all of the contracting and ownership entities that put that a relatively modest project together. Just to conclude, before I finish up, I just wanted to say a little bit of where I am sitting now, actually in the southeast of Ireland, what the context for Ireland, and I'm sure Andrew's going to talk more at length about the evolving offshore wind energy situation in Ireland. But I do see some similarities with Newfoundland and Labrador. Ireland's economy maybe is much different from today as a modern economy compared to what Newfoundland was in the late 1980s and early 1990s. But having said that, the western seaboard of Ireland probably has some similarities to the coastline of Newfoundland. Ireland has perhaps a modern industry now, but it doesn't have the traditional heavy industries of other parts of the UK or Europe. So, with the exception perhaps of Harland and Wolff and Belfast, which I've shown in the top slide here. But I would make the point that the offshore wind energy sector still has big elements to be installed. The hub and the cells of these the wind turbines are pretty big, and Andrew can speak to this more than I can, but it's they're in the range of 4 to say 600 tons. So all of the marine equipment required in the offshore for installation of wind energy still requires sophisticated marine equipment, and I think that was really just the point I wanted to make to complete my presentation.
Thanks, Bill. That was really, really insightful, and we will loop back on a few of those comments in the question portion. I'll throw it over to yourself there, Dowie.
Okay, thank you. Let's jump to the next slide, please. Yeah, so I guess this is just a little bit about Aker Solutions, the company that I'm working for. So Aker got its start in Norway, I think over 100 years or more ago now. In Canada, so I'm in St. John's, Newfoundland. Aker has been in this region for 30 plus years. Currently, 300 plus employees, and we kind of span the sort of the full life cycle of I guess engineering and project execution phases. So we have a consultancy group, and we get involved supporting clients at times, sort of right at that initial concept inception phase, initial feasibility, and then carry on through sort of the traditional development phases of FEED and EPC. We also have a branch that supports locally here marine operations. We're involved in the West White Rose project, which is coming up, which Bill had made reference to. We also support existing offshore facilities through operations and maintenance, and also decommissioning as well. So just a few photos there. It's just toggle back. Yeah, just a couple photos there of some, I guess, the variety of offshore facilities that we're locally involved with here out of this office. So there we go. Let's jump ahead. So I'm going to try to spend, I guess, really as much time as I can speaking about execution challenges, right? For currently out of this office, I guess we're currently supporting 2 offshore projects at the moment. The West White Rose, we have the contract for the offshore hookup. So that's about a 30,000 ton topsides that's going to be being hooked up later this year. So we're actively involved in that planning as well. An offshore wind development is approximately 1,000 megawatts off the coast of New York. So we're involved in the hookup of that, the HVDC converter platform as well. So lots on the go. So with regards to offshore, I kind of started with a statement there that really your ability to be successful when we're talking about offshore execution to a large degree really comes down to how well you're able to overcome a lot of the unique challenges that are associated with offshore projects. First point that I kind of want to talk about from a challenge perspective is logistics. There's a great quote there attributed to Sun Tzu, who wrote the great book Art of War well over 2,000 years ago, right? He's quoted as saying, "In war, amateurs talk strategy, but professionals talk logistics." And I've just always loved that quote. Logistics is a very, very, very significant challenge when we're working in the offshore. I don't think it could be overstated. Time and weather windows, Bill made a couple really good points. You might have noticed a photograph of that vessel, that remarkable looking vessel that Bill had on his slide, the Pioneering Spirit. That's a heavy lift, a specialized heavy lift vessel that's coming to install a 30,000 ton topsides offshore on the gravity-based structure that's going to be a couple hundred kilometers out in the North Atlantic. Those boats get under contract years in advance. So you have to make planning commitments and schedule commitments around those vessels. They can only operate under very, very controlled and strict weather and sea states wind conditions. That presents a lot of logistical challenges in trying to do any work offshore. Personnel is a big challenge. Offshore execution campaigns a lot of times are short in duration, 30, 60, 90 days. If you're trying to attract construction labor and you're competing against jobs that might be for folks in Canada here, there's lots of work for construction trades in places like Western Canada that can be long-term, multi-year contracts. So to try to convince people to come and work on an offshore project where you can't even confirm the dates for them, and it's only going to be for maybe 60 days, it's very, very difficult to attract people. When you get people, there's a need for specialized training. It can be very, very challenging. Materials and equipment. So, when we're working offshore, in general, there are no tools and equipment that are available for your use. So you've got to bring every last thing that you need and every last thing that you think you might need to go and execute whatever that work is that you're trying to do offshore. So if you get out offshore to go do a task and you don't have the materials or you don't have the equipment or the engineering isn't complete, that's a very, very big failure. That's a very, very costly mistake. And that can come down to something as simple as, not having, the right size gaskets for a small little piping job you're trying to do. Safety systems is very challenging offshore. A lot of times when you're executing an offshore energy project, your scope is to actually go out and start up and complete construction on these facilities. So it's very common that the facility you're working on, the safety systems that are integral to that facility to make that safe for people are not functional yet. So you have to manage that with temporary systems. Facilities are very commonly designed with fire suppression, emergency lighting, evacuation alarms, all of these types of things. And it's very common when you're in an offshore project execution phase that none of those safety systems are operational. So you've got to manage how you're going to be able to work safely and keep people safe in the absence of those systems. Utilities as well kind of goes hand in hand with that. Facilities will have, commonly have compressed air and water, diesel, these types of things. But again, those are all permanent facilities that frequently aren't ready for use yet. So you need to manage that with temporaries. Specialist vendors, there's, very commonly we need specialized vendors to come out and provide support that are having to travel in, and with the uncertainty in the schedule and the timing, it gets very, very challenging. And supply chain as well, just, being able to source the materials you need, manage them, and get them to where you need them when you can get them creates a lot of challenges. How we manage that is through planning, right, to a large degree, right? Detailed and thorough planning is how we manage that logistics challenge. Next slide. I've only got a few more slides. I'll try to get through these quick because I'm mindful of my time here. Access is another big challenge. So especially if you're working as a designer, a planner, an engineer, it's very infrequent that you can actually go out and put your hands on something or go out and physically see it. So we manage that. All the designs now, modern design is all done with 3D design tools and methods. That's pretty common. But we're increasingly using technology. We're using drones now offshore here locally, robotics. The newer model iPhones have LiDAR cameras built into them. So with some apps, we use a Polycam app that allows us to be able to actually use our iPhones to get dimensional survey level quality data that we can use in our design. Let's jump ahead. Next slide. Regulatory complexity. I mean, this topic alone could probably take an entire hour, but you know, very, very complicated. And you get into these scenarios where you have permanent facilities and then temporary facilities that are adjacent to it. And the permanent facility is designed and governed under one set of regulations, but your temporary facility falls under other regulations, and you've got to be able to manage that and coordinate that and ensure you've got all the right permitting and approvals and authorizations. The photo on the right, that was the Hebron facility. I was involved in that project during that phase, and the permanent facility was designed to manage something as simple as just rainwater falling on the deck. Is regulated by wastewater and discharge regulations. In the permanent facility, where it's 300 kilometers offshore, it falls under federal regulations. But where we were doing commissioning activities there near shore, there were also provincial regulations that applied to that state, and the facility wasn't designed to meet the provincial regulations. So it wasn't insurmountable, but it was just an example of all of these complexities that come with you know, trying to execute work in an offshore environment. Jump ahead. I think this might be my last slide. Yeah. So productivity productivity when you're working in the offshore is another really, really big challenge. To get, you know, different people will use different numbers, and it depends a little on your definition of productivity. But you know, using a number of a productivity, you know, as low as 50% or even 30% for, you know, an 8 or 10-hour shift is not uncommon in offshore. There's so many delays, weather delays, communication. SIMOPS is a huge challenge. Bill made that comment as well. You can see there the first photo. That's a heavy lift vessel doing some decommissioning that was here in our offshore region. You know, coordinating all of those activities and trying to have multiple trades working in and around those critical operations when they're happening. And it's very common as well when you're working offshore that if you're involved in a particular contract in a particular scope, but there will be other stakeholders that are on that same facility trying to accomplish different scopes at the same time. So that just adds another layer of complexity to, you know, trying to execute these big jobs offshore. There we go. I think that's it for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Dowie. That was fantastic and very insightful and interesting. You're talking about the sort of LiDAR technology being used in your sector as well. We recently had 2 years ago a winner of one of our PMI awards, national awards here in Ireland, which was a LiDAR survey and modeling methodology as part of a national broadband rollout. So very interesting to see it in another sector over there. So Andrew, to yourself, ESB.
Yeah, thanks, Terry. Thanks, Samuel. Yeah, as you mentioned before, I'm Andrew Foster. My background's in oil and gas originally, and I now work in ESB as a project director for floating wind. So first off, I'll just share a bit of background about the company on the next slide, please. So yeah, I don't know if you can see that okay, but the ESB are a state utility who operate in Ireland and the UK. It actually stands for Electricity Supply Board. We're 96% government owned, and we were established in 1927, so we're just approaching our centenary. We have business activities in 3 main areas. We're the owner and operator of the regulated transmission and distribution networks in the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, so it's like a single electricity market. We have a customer-facing business with about 1.4 million customers, I think, and that includes supply of electricity, gas, and smart energy services, and that's across Ireland and Great Britain. And we have an operational generation portfolio of around 5.5 gigawatts, and that's from a combination of thermal and renewable assets, and that's across, again, the island of Ireland and GB. And if you can see, there's a very small picture on the top left of the slide which shows Ardna Crusher. So that was our first project. So it was constructed almost 100 years ago now, became operational in 1929. And at that time, it provided almost the entire electrical output for the island of Ireland from a hydroelectric station in County Clare. It's still operating today, but it only provides about 2% of the country's needs, and the rest comes from this, sort of quite broad portfolio of thermal and mixture of thermal and renewables. At present, about 80% of the electrical demand is met through thermal generation. So we're making progress, but ESB have a clear net zero by 2040 strategy. So to achieve the strategy, we need to carry out a large scale transition across our asset base. Next slide, please. So this is just an overview of the challenge that we face with this, the energy trilemma. I'm sure many of you have seen this already, but basically the supply that we build needs to be through a balance of affordability. It has to be affordable for our customers. We need a secure supply, and again, I think Bill mentioned this sort of change in geopolitical events, and we've all seen this huge fluctuation in energy prices. And also recently, we've seen the impacts of climate change with the likes of Storm in Ireland, where the electricity supply was severely disrupted across the country. So there's quite some work to do just to maintain that security of supply. And of course, this has to be done sustainably. So we have to decarbonize the supply that we are building out. Next slide, please. So this is just an overview of the pillars of the net zero electricity system that ESB are working towards. Now I'll talk a bit more about renewables rollout. That's my role in the company. But we have 6 pillars basically. So it's large scale renewables construction to replace that thermal asset base. Grid and infrastructure needs to be put in place to support that. So there's a great deal of work needs to be carried out on sort of grid upgrades and to make sure that the grid is robust. Storage, both at large scale asset level. So this is for future hydrogen production, and also at distribution level for like smaller scale battery storage and so on. And this these are linked to a clean dispatchable power supply. Okay, next slide, please. So yeah, this is my final slide. So it's just shows how the company is evolving really. But if you look back a few years, we will have had a relatively small number of large scale power stations, generally built close to demand centres, and that portfolio is changing very significantly towards a range of renewables. Now on this slide, I'm only showing the offshore renewables, but we also have a pipeline of onshore projects, solar, wind, battery, and hydrogen, and so on. But I'll just focus on the offshore wind side. And what you can see is it's a very diverse portfolio. So we have projects in all stages of the life cycle. From the likes of Galloper, which is an operational wind farm. So you're just in the sort of O&M phase for that, to the potential floating wind projects off the west coast of Scotland and off the Atlantic coast, which are in the very early stages of development. And I think that that sort of change in that asset base comes with a lot of challenges from a project management perspective. So we have a great deal of uncertainty to deal with. I think the project timescales are much longer. A typical offshore wind farm delivery timescale would be 10 years, from the sort of concept stage to commercial operations. And throughout that time, there's a lot of uncertainty in grid connections, consenting, policy, the sort of leasing and reimbursement frameworks. So you can see, and I think it ties in with Dowie's comments a bit about the offshore execution challenges. ESB are moving from sort of onshore large power stations where they've built these projects over the years to an offshore environment that's far more uncertain and a very broad portfolio with a lot of different sort of phases of each of these projects. Yep, I think that's about all I've got. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. That was really insightful, and I really like the trilemma thing. I think that resonates pretty much with everyone on this call, and anyone in the project management industry. Before we jump into the panelist discussion, obviously everyone can see the PDU code on the screen. We will also share this presentation. The video will also be uploaded as well. So we will move into an exciting panel discussion here. Again, if anyone should have any questions, by all means, please put them into the chat, and we can answer those as we go along. We have some here. So I'd like to bring this first one to yourself there, Bill. You raised a couple of interesting points there, particularly on the Hibernia project, the failures of the project. So I'd like to bring this one to you with regards to offshore energy project, particularly mega projects. I think we can all agree that that's what they are. They obviously require immense coordination and investment. But what are the key success factors in offshore energy production? And I know we've talked about failures quite a bit across the board, so I'm keen to hear the success factors that you would put it down to.
I'll try and at least make a first response to that one. One of the things I didn't mention at the beginning, because I was conscious of time, was looking at, again, with Newfoundland at the time, it was in the early 1990s. There was no local expertise, and the expertise and management primarily came from overseas, primarily came from Europe, actually, and some other parts of Canada and the United States as well. The major contractors who were competing and working on the substructure, which was constructed in Newfoundland, were either Norwegian, North American, or they were French and UK-based joint ventures with their local partners. But to sort of try and answer your question, just certainly from my own experience in the working with some of the majors outside of strictly the engineering environment, I mean, all of those companies go through a stage gate process like other major global companies in other industry sectors. So I think, looking at at least from the stage gate process is really what sets the stage for a successful project. I mean, I think it's well understood that the opportunity for adding value to the project is during the initial phases of the project and not during the latter phases of the project. And I think that's something that many people in the audience here today will have studied. So getting the business case, a robust business case, obviously is the starting point, and having a tight and closed scope of work. When it comes to like the pre-feed and feed in the oil and gas sector means front-end engineering design. Sometimes owners actually run competitive parallel feeds to really try and shake out the appropriate execution method and the contractor that comes to the table with the appropriate expertise. So they're some of the things I would notice, at least at the front end.
Fantastic. And look, I think a couple of points there with regards to the overseas aspect. I think it's quite telling with the broad audience that we actually have quite a number of overseas expertise on this call in the panel discussion, let alone the audience as well, which I think is quite fitting to the topic that we're discussing there, Bill. So fair point there. And, hearing the initial phases, I think that's always key. And it's, particularly from my sector on the real estate side, it's always the initial phase where you actually save the most amount of money. Value engineering is what they call it, but realistically, it's all about the initial phase of design is where you make the true savings. So it's very interesting to hear that from that perspective. I guess, Dowie, I wouldn't mind bringing this question to yourself as well, and just getting your perspective on some success factors there as well.
Yeah. So I mean, I certainly echo what Bill said. I think, when Bill was saying it's funny, so, I mean, you can see me in this office that I'm sitting in, right? So I'm in downtown St. John's. the company that I'm working for now started here in this region for the Hibernia project. So like I said, the company was from Norway. Our offshore energy industry that I'm now a part of, that was started, before my time, was really founded on external expertise. So people came internationally a lot. Even our original legislation and was all sort of grounded in what was being done in the North Sea. So I think, you talk a lot about domain expertise. I think having people with the right experience and the right expertise is a key factor. When it comes to having a successful project, you need people that have done it before to be able to lead the team and guide the team. Another thing I might just add, in the context of being successful, there can be a lot of bias when it comes to decision making, especially like management level decision making on these mega projects. These projects are competing for capital that is very mobile, right? And you can be part of a project team that wants to see your project proceed, and that can lead to bias when it comes to planning, cost forecasting, cost estimating, these types of things. So, in the context of success being, what I would think of a success being sort of, on time, on budget, that only comes when you have realistic cost estimates, realistic schedules. And you're not going to have that if you don't have the right expertise, that domain expertise. But you're also not going to have that if there's any planning bias, power bias that's at play within your project team. So yeah.
Sadly, I think that exists everywhere, doesn't it, Dowie? Unfortunately, that's a key success factor to any project, which is it's very interesting to hear. Obviously, on this scale, it's still the exact same fundamentals. I'd like to bring this next one to yourself, there, Andrew. How are regulatory frameworks and government policies shaping the development of offshore energy megaprojects, and what improvements are needed to accelerate growth? And I think it's quite fitting, bringing it to yourself, Andrew, with regards to frameworks and government here in Ireland. So yeah, curious your thoughts on that one.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. I think the first thing to say is that the policy and supporting frameworks are absolutely vital for successful delivery. And it's interesting to see across the UK, Northern Ireland, and the Republic of Ireland, even though it's a fairly small geographic area, the policy and frameworks are at quite different places, really. And I was just thinking back to a good example in the Republic of Ireland, where actually the first offshore wind farm was built here over 20 years ago. And the second one is yet to be built. And the policy and regulatory framework that needs to support that project development is still being evolved. So, you look back at the history, and we've gone from, you'd say, a developer-led system that's kind of attracted early investment, but there's not a great deal of confidence in being able to get the projects away ultimately. A couple of years ago, that's switched to a plan-led system, so there's more certainty now and a clearer path for project delivery. But the time frame is quite slow, if I can say it that way. So we've got the Maritime Area Regulatory Authority has been formed. There's a DMAP, Designated Marine Area Planning System, where you sort of do a government level constraints assessments around the coast and select areas for competition, from developers. But we're on the first area, so there's been sort of some initial projects in an earlier round, and I can see that whole time scale is just quite lengthy. So I'd say that in terms of success factors, it's having that clear policy to start with, just having those basic elements of that regulatory framework, and then ensuring that it's a fairly smooth process in terms of the project steps that need to be taken. It sounds very basic, but it's not always in place, and that's been the observation looking around Ireland, Northern Ireland, and GB.
Yeah, that's particularly interesting, and I think it's an interesting point you raise on it being smooth and a clear path to the end goal. And again, speaking for myself, with regards to the real estate sector, that's our biggest challenge is, a clear route to how do we build homes. Obviously there's quite a large housing crisis. It seems to be quite global these days. And it's what's the quickest route to getting planning and getting through without getting held up in legal judiciary issues. And I think as you point out, it's that smoothness and clarity and the framework that probably resonates quite well there. Just like to bring this one to yourself there, Dowie, with regards to, you had some interesting photos there of regulatory transition points mid-sea, and I think that's an interesting point. How are those kind of challenges overcome with regards to having that in place?
Yeah, I guess, when we talk about the, I guess just the topic, right, of regulations and their impact, what's being done and what can be done, right, to what improvements are needed. It's interesting. There's been quite a lot of regulatory change here in this region, in Canada, in this space very recently. Just in the past few years, the Bill C-49 became law. That extended the remit of our offshore regulators, so the regulatory bodies acting on behalf of the federal government, overseeing offshore energy projects, start to finish. Their remit was expanded to include renewables. So previous to that, it was strictly oil and gas. So that's certainly a positive development. When we talk about the complexity, up until very recently here in Canada, from an offshore perspective, depending on where you were on the map, as it were, in Canadian waters, your project might have fallen under the provincial regulations of the province. There were regulations that governed the northern areas of our country and Indigenous affairs. The waters of some very large bays, like Hudson's Bay as an example, fell under a different set of regulations again. And if you're on the west coast of Canada, offshore, it fell under different regulations than the east coast. And these regulations were very, very complex, difficult to navigate, very prescriptive, and they didn't reflect the sort of ongoing changes in technology that happened. So up until very recently, for an example, here in Newfoundland, our regulations were stated very explicitly what electrical and structural codes you needed to be using in the design of your facilities. But, a lot of technology has moved on. There's new things that are available, but the regulations still state that you've got to do it these particular ways. So the Canadian government here in our jurisdiction recently undertook this initiative to basically revamp, harmonize to one set of regulations for all areas of offshore Canada, which was great. But they've also moved from a prescriptive method or philosophy of regulations to a performance-based method. So the regulations now just provide very high-level objectives, but they leave it to the project developer to basically define how it is they're going to meet those objectives. So, I think that's one example of some things that are being done in the regulatory space that I think can help. I go back to the comment about competing for capital. When I look at offshore Canada, there are companies that could invest in our region for offshore energy projects, but they could equally invest that capital in other regions in the world. So it behooves the government to do what they can to make their area attractive for that investment. And I think, streamlining permitting, streamlining the regulatory burden can really help in that regard.
Yeah, very interesting. I think it's a common theme there. That's interesting. You also touch on the technology update. I think that's probably across multiple different sectors at the moment. There's quite a large change, and obviously AI is a hot topic, and it's, how does it help people? How does it get changed? How does it get implemented into organizations to be used, on that aspect? Bill, I'd like to bring this one to yourself. Looking at past offshore mega projects, what are key lessons that have been learned, and how can the industry apply these insights to improve future projects? And I guess I'll call it project managers in general. How, what lessons learned could you give everyone on the call?
Yeah, I guess perhaps some of them sound like stating the obvious, but the contractor selection, I think, is one of the key elements, and the relationships you have with both the unions and the contractors certainly, I think, has been one of the positive factors when in the projects that have reached the end point in Newfoundland.
And sorry, just on that point, I just want to touch on what Dowie mentioned earlier with regards to personnel. Do you think that plays into the contractor aspect as well, making sure, sort of talking about this 30-day on offshore versus, somebody getting a 2-year contract? Do you think that plays into the appropriate contractor as well?
Yes, and I would sort of defer to Dewey on that one a little bit. I mean, I would say Newfoundlanders are kind of more used to rotational work than probably any other sort of population cohort in other parts of Canada or elsewhere, actually. So they're actually especially good at that. But I think, looking at the union relationships, I think, was a starting point for Hibernia. And I think that's carried through to all of the projects. And the contractor selection was brought into fairly stark relief in the early days of the Hibernia project. And certainly my experience on the follow-on with the transshipment project, we had a truly integrated management team, and that was certainly one of the keys to success in that project.
Awesome. And Dowie, I might bring you in there on that one in particular, kind of same sort of question, but again, curious on this personnel contractor, does that play a part of it as well?
I think contractor selection, to Bill's point, is, that's vital. If you're an owner organization that's looking to bring in a tier 1 prime contractor, who that gets awarded to, that's a very, very key decision. Bill's he's touched on it a few times there, something that I suppose I take it for granted here in our region, but it was started with Hibernia. A real success factor is, getting, stakeholder engagement and community engagement early. We see it today now with some of the new wind to hydrogen projects that are being proposed and talked about here now. But the Hibernia sort of set the standard there. Hebron came along later with agreements up front with the unions that really helped to mitigate almost completely any risk from a sort of labor disruption perspective. Those would have been significant risks and issues that had they happened on Hibernia or later on Hebron that just didn't transpire because those agreements were in place. And one other point I'll just sort of echo again that Bill had made a comment on was on the comment around integrated teams. I can speak from my own personal experience that offshore projects that have been successful have taken that integrated management team approach where, you think of the traditional hierarchy, there's an owner's team, and then you have, your prime contractors team, and then your lower tier, second and third tier subcontractors. The projects that I've been involved in that have been most successful have sort of dispensed of that hierarchy, and you've just sort of had, taken the best people from the varying organizations and just integrated into sort of one team that is responsible, right? And you remove a lot of that finger pointing that can come, from one contractor to another, and from an owner to a subcontractor. Basically everybody has skin in it, so to speak. I've seen that to be very effective as well.
That's a very interesting point, particularly on the integrated teams. I mean, I know for myself, I definitely love to be able to say that it'd be great to see a bit more integration, but unfortunately, I don't think I'm going to see drywallers doing plumbing work or electricians turning their hand to steel stud. But I do get your point, though, on the integrated teams, and I think that's quite a key component to. It's almost that concept of everyone having a seat at the table, and everyone having a responsibility to deliver the projects. And obviously the stakeholder engagement. I think everyone on the call can probably resonate with that one. Doesn't matter the size, scale, time of your project. I think early stakeholder engagement and understanding what is actually required to be delivered is key. On that. So very interesting points there. Andrew, I might bring this one to yourself as well. Any insights to improve future projects from your perspective?
I think one very quick observation is I think sometimes we look at the offshore wind industry as a new industry that's got its own learnings to sort of apply. But I can see that there's a wealth of knowledge in oil and gas from offshore, from Newfoundland, from the UK North Sea, and seen some really good initiatives, especially in the UK, to bring in that knowledge into offshore wind. There's a lot of commonality, so it's good to see learnings from one industry being applied to another as well.
Yeah, no, that's a very valid point, and I think again, sort of tying it back to PMI and why we're all here today, I think that's the vast benefit of this is we're able to share this insight and actually really understand other sectors and industries that, I don't think anyone would have really understood until you're sitting here on this call and starting to scratch the surface on it. Look, I am very conscious of time, but I would like to pull one of the questions from the chat here. Just to let everyone know, we will answer all of these and circulate around the answers to these as well as part of the circulation. But Andrew, I would like to bring this one to yourself because it's quite interesting. Given the rapidly declining costs of solar energy and storage, how can the offshore wind industry innovate and collaborate to reduce costs and remain competitive in the Ireland renewable energy market?
It's a good question. What I see on ESB's portfolio is it comes back to that question of scale. So I think to deliver the megawatts that we need to deliver, we need a combination of onshore wind, solar, and a lot of offshore wind just to reach the levels. So they're obviously in very different environments and sort of different cost profiles. But I don't think you can just select one technology that will answer that trilemma for us, basically.
Yeah, no, it's a very valid point. And I guess, again, from the real estate sector, we're seeing a lot more of our sector. We're starting to deliver homes that actually have the solar from the get-go. But again, that's not going to be the end solution, I don't believe, to this. I think as you're pointing out, it's kind of that combined solution and connectivity that's required at the end of the day for that. Look, I am very conscious of time. I would like to let everyone know that I appreciate the panelists sort of rushing through their presentations and keeping them short and sweet today, but we are looking to roll this out as a bit of a series throughout this year. So do keep an eye on advertisements and your calendars and your local chapters and so forth. We will be discussing with the panelists and having more in-depth presentations, and we might bring along a few others from their organizations, if possible, to the presentations and have them a bit more specific to each sector that they've been involved in or currently involved in. So really looking forward to that as we progress. And look, a big shout out to the Newfoundland and Labrador chapter there, Gary. I know you're on the line, so thank you very much for all your assistance in pulling this together. And a very, very big thank you to our panelists. I know we had to take some time out of our busy days. Appreciate it's various different time zones, so it took a little bit of coordination to get this all together. So thank you very much for that, and thank you to everyone that joins. I appreciate this is evening time here in Ireland, so it's not always easy to attend, but we've had fairly good attendance and steady attendance throughout the presentation. So I hope you all enjoyed it. Thank you very much, everyone, and yeah, keep an eye on your advertisement and local chapters and connections. There will be more in this series to come. Very interesting chat. So thank you very much, guys. We'll leave it there.
Thanks all.
Fantastic.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye.